knew this Christmas dinner wouldn't be peaceful from the moment I stepped into that house. There were signs no one could mistake. The suffocating atmosphere, the forced hugs, and the averted eyes as if everyone was hiding something. I wondered if I should leave immediately, before the real storm broke out. But then, like every year, I told myself, just endure a few hours. I was wrong. And that mistake, this time, would change my life. My name is Amanda, 30 years old, the youngest of 4 siblings. Born in a small town near Boise, Idaho, I've always been labeled the baby, even though I've grown up long ago. Successful in my career with a small downtown apartment, independent since 22, all of that seemed meaningless the moment I walked into this house. To them, if I wasn't married or didn't have children, I was still just a kid who refused to grow up. My family had a tradition of holding Christmas dinner at my parents' house in the suburbs of Caldwell. It's a spacious old craftsman house, built by my great-grandfather back in the 1910s. From the outside, it looks picture-perfect: red-tiled roof, wide front porch, and a backyard filled with tall pine trees. But to me, it never really felt like home. It was cold, rigid, and full of unspoken rules. Rules that, if broken, earned you nothing but pitiful or disdainful looks. I stepped into the house, clutching my thick coat tightly, trying to steady myself. The air was heavy with the smell of cinnamon and roasted meat, laughter echoing from the living room. But instead of warmth, I felt like an outsider. Ethan, my oldest brother, was already there with his wife, a woman who smiled far too much, and their 2 noisy sons. Sophie, my older sister, stood next to her husband, chattering non-stop about their new house near Lake Coeur d'Alene. Caleb, the 3rd sibling, barely lifted his eyes from his phone, while his newest girlfriend brushed past me with a dismissive nod. I hadn't expected a warm welcome. In fact, I had rehearsed my polite smile before walking in. But when my mother Elaine approached with a stiff smile and gave me a hug that lasted less than 2 seconds, I knew nothing had changed. "Amanda, you're here," she said, her voice more of a statement than a greeting. "Come on in, don't stand out there in the cold." I nodded, telling myself not to let the little things ruin tonight. Just a few hours, I thought. Then I'd be back to my own world, where I didn't have to prove my worth to anyone. But that gnawing feeling of unease refused to let go. It crept into every glance, every half-spoken word, as if everyone was waiting for something, or preparing for a scene I hadn't been told about. I hung my coat on the old wooden hook by the door, my heavy boots thudding against the polished hardwood floor. No one seemed to notice me, or maybe they pretended not to. I took a deep breath and stepped into the living room, where the towering Christmas tree stood proudly by the big front window. The twinkling yellow lights shimmered on silver ornaments, but they couldn't chase away the chill inside me. On the sofa, Ethan was booming about their recent ski trip, his voice filling the room like he was the sun and we were mere satellites. Sophie laughed heartily at every joke, while my mother nodded approvingly, as if this was the perfect portrait of a successful family. I slipped into a lone chair in the corner, trying to find a space where I could blend into the background unnoticed. No one asked about my job, my life in Boise, or anything at all about me. In their eyes, I was just a faded accessory, useful only when they needed an extra hand with groceries or babysitting. Caleb eventually looked up from his phone just long enough to give me a bland "hey" before diving back into his screen. His girlfriend, whose name I couldn't even remember, snapped photos of the tree, fiddling with Instagram filters, completely ignoring my presence, like I was invisible. My mother bustled into the room, hands dusted with flour, muttering orders. "Amanda, help me bring in some extra chairs from the backyard, we're a bit crowded." I got up, noting how she said my name like it was an inconvenience. I had no choice but to nod and head out into the freezing cold, where the air immediately bit through my thick sweater. Dragging dusty plastic chairs back inside, I couldn't help but feel absurdly out of place, like a server in what was supposed to be my own home. No one noticed me, muddied and fumbling with the chairs, while everyone else sipped wine and chatted comfortably. When I returned to the dining room, my father, Charles, was fussing over the crystal glasses on the table, his face set in a grim line like he was preparing for a royal banquet. He glanced at me and said, in a low voice heavy enough to crush any spirit, "Go wash your hands, Amanda. Just look at yourself." No thank you, no acknowledgement, just a cold command, as if my mere existence was an embarrassment. I quietly walked to the bathroom, staring at my own reflection in the mirror. My hazel eyes held a tiredness I didn't want to admit. I splashed cold water on my face, forcing myself to regain composure. I couldn't let them see me crack. Not this time. Honey glazes that slid from the kitchen, clinking glasses, children's laughter, my mother barking out instructions. It was like an old film playing on loop, and I was just a blurry extra in the background. I wiped my hands on a towel, took a deep breath, and stepped back out into the performance. But deep down I knew a part of me had already started to crack. And this time, it wouldn't be so easy to patch it back up. When everyone started moving toward the dining room, I knew the worst was yet to come. My father sat proudly at the head of the long table, Ethan and Sophie quickly taking seats around him like a well-rehearsed ritual. Caleb and his girlfriend squeezed in at the edge, close enough to count as adults. I stood frozen at the doorway, feeling like an intruder at my own family's event. No one offered me a seat. No one turned to ask where I would sit. My mother approached, carrying a large tray of garlic bread, her smile brittle and fixed. "Amanda, sweetheart, your seat is over there," she said softly, gesturing to the far corner, where a small, flimsy folding table had been hastily set up against the wall. I froze. The so-called kids' table barely came up to my waist, surrounded by mismatched plastic chairs, the kind you'd find at a 5-year-old's birthday party. The table was covered in wrinkled disposable cloth, the plates scratched and cheap. A few little cousins were already there, scribbling with crayons, juice spilled everywhere. A cold blade of humiliation cut through me. I was 30 years old, I paid my own bills, I bought my own car. I stood on my own 2 feet in this world. But here, in their eyes, I was no better than a toddler. I swallowed hard, feeling the tight knot of anger and hurt forming in my chest. "Go sit with the little ones, it'll be fun," my mother added, smiling as if she'd just offered me a prize. I looked over at the main table, candles glowing warmly, red wine glistening in crystal glasses, the soft clinking of silverware on fine china. A world I clearly didn't belong to. None of them, not Ethan, not Sophie, not Caleb, said a word. No one spoke up to say this was wrong. No one admitted how insulting it was to treat a grown woman like this. They just nodded along as if it was perfectly natural. I forced a smile so brittle it almost hurt. "Sure, Mom," I said, my voice flat and mechanical. Dragged myself to the tiny table, every step feeling heavier than the last. I sat down in a chair meant for a child, my legs awkwardly crammed under the table. The kids barely noticed me. They were busy fighting over spoons and tossing peas into the air, giggling wildly. A chunk of mashed potato landed on my sleeve. I stiffened, feeling like I might shatter. I looked back at the main table one last time. They were deep in conversation about summer vacations, work promotions, new houses. No one glanced my way. No one called me over. I was nothing more than a shadow, a blurred part of the family portrait they tried to paint. And at that very moment, I realized. This wasn't just about a table. This was how they had always seen me throughout my life. An outsider. A child who would never be grown enough to deserve respect. My chest heaved. My mind buzzed. This time, I knew I couldn't just fake a smile and let it go. I sat there, struggling to hold the plastic spoon with hands trembling in anger. The kids laughed and played, their spoons clinking against plastic plates in chaotic noise. No one at the main table even glanced my way. They kept raising their glasses, laughing, as if I had willingly vanished from their world long ago. I felt something break inside me, not because of the table, not because of the cold stares, but because I realized I had never truly been valued here. A piece of corn fell onto my shoe. I looked at it, then glanced around the messy little table, Then up at the grand candlelit main table, a wave of cold swept through me, cutting through the last threads of endurance I had left. Without a word, I pushed the chair back. The screech of the plastic legs scraping the floor was loud enough to make a few heads turn in annoyance, but no one said a thing. I walked across the dining room, each step weighed down not by food, but by years, decades of trying, enduring, believing that if I were just better, they would finally see me. But they never truly saw me. I reached the entryway and grabbed my coat. My fingers trembled slightly as I pulled up the zipper, not from the cold, but from holding back all the words I knew would burn everything down if spoken aloud. At that moment, my mother poked her head out from the kitchen, her face a mix of surprise and irritation. "Amanda? Where are you going? Dinner's not even over yet." I stood tall, clutching my handbag, feeling more composed than I had all evening. "I'm leaving," I said, my voice colder and steadier than I expected. My mother frowned, as if I had said something outrageously unreasonable. "Don't be childish, Amanda. It's just a seat. You can't just walk out of Christmas dinner." "I can," I replied, emphasizing every word. "And I am." A heavy silence fell over the hallway. The noise from the dining room continued, muffled behind the walls. None of them realized what was happening. None of them knew that this time, I wasn't coming back. My mother opened her mouth to say something more, but I didn't wait. I turned, pulled open the front door. The December wind hit me full in the face, freezing to the bone, and yet, I had never breathed easier. Behind me, my father's voice thundered, commanding as always. "Anya, get back here now." I didn't respond. I stepped down the porch steps, my boots striking the frozen concrete. My car was parked across the street, the dim street lamp stretching my shadow long across the ground. My mother called after me, this time with a tinge of panic. "Amanda, don't blow this out of proportion. You're ruining I opened my car door, threw my bag onto the passenger seat, and before getting in, I turned back for one last look at the house. The house that once symbolized family, reunion, all things good, now stood as nothing more than a cold, rigid shell filled with unspoken rules and suffocating expectations. "Merry Christmas, everyone," I whispered under my breath, just loud enough for myself to hear. Then I got in, slammed the door, and shut out all the voices behind me. I started the engine, wrapped my arms around the freezing steering wheel, and drove away. I didn't look back. The dark street slid past outside the window. Christmas lights from strangers' houses blinked faintly in the night, like distant, fading hopes. I didn't know where I was going. I only knew anywhere was better than the place I had just left. The wind howled through the cracks in the car window, and in that sound, for the first time in years, I heard my own heart, silent but free. I drove aimlessly through the night, the streetlights blurring into streaks against the glass. My hands gripped the steering wheel, knuckles whitening from cold and tension. I didn't know my destination. I only knew I had to get as far away as possible. Caldwell slipped away behind me, replaced by snowy fields and empty highways. The radio buzzed with an old Christmas song, but I didn't listen. In my mind, the evening replayed itself, the kids' table, my mother's cold eyes, my father's commanding voice. Every word, every glance, echoed inside me. I felt like I had finally broken free from an invisible cage that had trapped me all my life. The gas gauge blinked low. I sighed, scanning the road ahead for a place to stop. Up ahead, the faint neon flicker of a roadside diner came into view. Millie's Diner, the old sign swaying in the icy wind. I turned into the almost empty parking lot, the tires crunching over a thin sheet of ice. I killed the engine, sitting there for a moment, hands still gripping the wheel, breathing hard. A part of me wanted to cry right then and there, but I clenched my jaw, swallowed it all down, and forced myself out of the car. The wind slammed against me as I crossed the lot. The diner's porch light flickered dimly, casting a yellowish glow onto the wet ground. I tightened my coat around me and pushed open the door. A little bell chimed. Inside, the air was warm, thick with the smell of toasted bread and fresh coffee. Only a few people sat scattered around. An elderly couple by the window, a middle-aged man hunched over a mug. The waitress in a bright red apron smiled at me. I chose a single booth, tucked in the back corner, sat down, and exhaled deeply. When the waitress, a graying woman with kind eyes, approached, I simply said, "A hot coffee, please." She nodded and disappeared behind the counter. I leaned back in the booth, staring blankly into space. My phone buzzed again in my pocket. No doubt more calls and messages from my family. But I didn't look. Not now. The coffee arrived. I wrapped my hands around the warm mug, letting the heat seep into my frozen fingers, easing some of the numbness gnawing at my heart. I sat there for a long time, letting the quiet Christmas music from the old radio in the corner wash over me. Here, in this small, warm diner, away from the crushing expectations and silent judgments, I could finally breathe. No scrutinizing looks. No heavy expectations. No playing the baby of the family in a script that should have ended long ago. Just me, a cup of coffee, and freedom. And even though no one back home would understand, I knew I had just given myself the greatest Christmas gift. In the beginning, Mom is freaking out because she's worried about you. Stop acting like a child. Sophie was gentler. Sweetheart, come back, we can work this out. And Caleb, true to his blunt nature, said, "Please don't turn Christmas into a joke, Amanda." I tightened my grip around the warm cup, feeling both sadness and anger boil inside me. Not a single apology. No one asked how I felt. All they cared about was patching up the perfect family image. And they needed me back to fill my role in their little scripted play. The phone vibrated again. Another call from Dad. I stared at the name Dad flashing on the screen, my heart sinking. I knew if I answered, he would bark orders, growl, and try to overpower me like he always did. I let the call ring out without answering. The messages kept flooding in. "Mom is crying, Amanda, please. Don't be so selfish. Family comes first. You'll regret it if you don't come back now." I let out a dry, humorless laugh. Family, love, responsibility. Those words only mattered to them when I stayed quiet, nodded along, and endured. I set the phone down and buried my face in my hands. I was not the little girl they still thought I was. I no longer needed their approval or acceptance. And this time, I wasn't going to turn back. Outside the window, the snow started falling heavier, each flake sparkling under the dim streetlights. At that moment, I felt like a small leaf torn from its branch, drifting through the storm, but freer than ever. I picked up my phone again. The notifications kept blinking, persistent, like knocking on a door I had already locked tight. I sighed and quietly powered the phone off. With that simple act, I felt as though I had finally severed an invisible cord that had bound me for years. I sat there in the diner, cradling the now cold coffee in my hands. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel guilty for choosing myself over my family. I stayed still for a long time, my eyes staring blankly at the fogged-up window. Outside, the streets lay silent under a heavy coat of snow, the flakes swirling like tiny rebellions against the darkness. Inside my coat pocket, my phone buzzed again. Part of me wanted to keep ignoring it, clinging to the fragile piece I had carved out. But another part, the part that had been quietly burning all evening, urged me to face it head-on. I pulled out my phone, my fingers swiping across the screen. A new barrage of messages, full of pleading, blaming, guilt, tripping. The same old song. I took a deep breath, feeling anger and sorrow pulse through my veins. If I stayed silent, they would think I was just sulking. They would blame me for being too sensitive, for not thinking about the family. No. This time, I wouldn't let them twist the story their way. I opened the family group chat, my fingers trembling slightly. Not from fear, but from resolve. I began to type. Everyone keeps asking why I left like that, but has anyone ever stopped to ask how I felt? I paused for a second. Tonight wasn't just about a seat. It wasn't just about a kid's table. It's proof of how you've always seen me all these years, as a child. Never worthy of being treated as an equal. I bit my lip, feeling the tension tightening in my chest. But I kept typing, each word carving itself deeper into old scars. I've built my life from nothing. I'm independent, I'm successful, I'm happy in my own way, but that has never been enough in this family's eyes. I glanced at the screen and saw the chat status light up. Ethan is typing. Mom is typing. I ignored it and kept going. Every time I come home, I'm not asked about my life. I'm not treated like an adult. I'm compared. I'm judged. I'm shoved back into the mold you all think I belong to. I'm tired of pretending everything's fine. I'm tired of holding my breath just so everyone else can feel comfortable while I'm suffocating. One more why. I didn't leave to get attention. I left because, for the first time in my life, I chose to stand up for myself. I paused, letting the emotions settle, and finished. If anyone truly cares, start by listening instead of judging. If all you want is for me to come back and keep playing the familiar invisible role, I'm sorry, but I'm not coming back. I reread the message, every word, every period. It was all true. No embellishments. No weakness. I hit send. The screen lit up, confirming the message was delivered. I set the phone down on the table, feeling as though a massive weight had been lifted from my chest. The diner around me remained silent, the only sound the wind howling softly through the doorframe cracks. I stared out the window, letting my thoughts drift like the winter wind. I didn't know how they would react. Maybe they would get angry. Maybe they would ignore me. Maybe they would try to drag me back, like they always had. But this time, I had drawn a boundary. A boundary clear and unmovable. For the first time, I didn't feel small inside the story of my own life anymore. Another notification popped up, this time from Sophie. Amanda, you're blowing this way out of proportion. It's just a seat, no need to make a big deal out of it. I leaned back into the chair and closed my eyes. No one asked why I felt hurt. No one acknowledged the years of being dismissed. Only blame. Only pressure to back down. A long message from Mom appeared, like the final drop that spilled the cup. You can't just run away every time you feel upset. Family is family, no one is perfect. If everyone acted like you, what would happen to this family? You're breaking my heart, Amanda. I stared at those lines, a sharp pain twisting in my chest. But mixed with the pain, there was also a strange sense of peace. Because at last they had shown exactly what I had always known. To them, my silent endurance mattered more than my real feelings. I didn't reply. There was no need. I placed my phone face down on the table, removing myself from the storm of anger they were trying to drag me into. Outside the window, the snow continued to fall silently, covering the world in a heavy white stillness. I took another sip of my now cold coffee, quietly whispering to myself. For the first time in my life, I chose silence, not out of fear, but because I finally understood I didn't need permission to be myself. I sat in the corner of the diner, listening to the faint sound of my spoon tapping lightly against the coffee cup, a small, sharp noise. My phone lay motionless on the table, its dark screen reflecting the dim lights above. Inside me, the words from my family still echoed, each one cutting coldly. But I no longer wanted to react the old way, silently enduring, pretending everything was fine. I opened my photo library and scrolled through hundreds of pictures until I found an old one. A Christmas photo from nearly 10 years ago. We're lined up in front of the giant Christmas tree in my parents' living room. Ethan and Sophie were smiling brightly. Caleb stood proudly next to our parents, everyone glowing with satisfaction. And me? I was teetering on the edge of the frame, a stiff, forced smile frozen on my face. I remembered clearly, they had called me into the photo at the last minute, just to complete the picture. That photo said everything without needing any explanation. I tapped share, opened the family group chat. My fingers moved quickly across the keyboard without hesitation. This is the family everyone is so desperate to protect. A family where someone has to force themselves to smile while knowing they're always standing on the sidelines. I'm done pretending. I attached the photo and hit send. A lightness surged through me as the message was delivered, as if I had finally dropped a burden I had been carrying for decades. I placed the phone face down again, not caring about the reactions. I hadn't done it to provoke. I hadn't done it to seek pity. I did it because the truth needed to be put in its rightful place, for the first time, in my own voice. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering all the old footprints. And in that moment I knew I was also covering the past with a fresh, clean layer. Cold, but pure. I sat quietly in the corner of the diner, my hands wrapped around the cold coffee cup. Outside, the snow kept falling endlessly, blanketing the empty street in white. No more buzzing phones. No more accusations. No more unreasonable demands. Only silence. And strangely, within that silence, I didn't feel lonely. I felt free. For the first time in many years, I wasn't being pulled back toward expectations that were never truly mine. No more trying to please everyone. No more bending myself to fit a mold that was never meant for me. I lay back, tilting my head to stare at the ceiling, bathed in the diner's dim yellow light. A small, genuine smile curved on my lips. Not forced, not reluctant. I had broken free from the invisible chains that had bound me since childhood. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring, and maybe the road ahead would be lonelier, more challenging. But right now, on this cold winter night with the wind howling outside, I knew I had done something I once thought impossible. I chose myself. And no matter what happens next, I knew I would never go back to being a shadow in someone else's story again. Amanda's story is not just about a ruined Christmas dinner. It's a journey of awakening after years of being suffocated by imposed expectations. Sometimes, the greatest courage isn't in fighting to be understood, but in choosing to walk away to reclaim your own worth. In real life, some relationships must be let go in order to find ourselves again. Because sometimes, true love begins with choosing yourself, even if it means walking alone. What do you think about Amanda's decision in this story? Have you ever felt the same way she did? Share your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to follow the channel to hear more heartfelt, real-life family stories.